The sun rose gently over the red soil of Enugu, casting golden light through the tall cashew trees that lined the narrow street of Umechuku village. The cock's crow blended with the melody of women fetching water from the community borehole, and the smell of akamu and akra filled the air. In the heart of this quiet Igbo town, two boys grew into men, Chijioke and Obinna. From childhood, their bond had been unbreakable. They were so inseparable that elders often joked that if Chijioke caught a cold, Obinna would sneeze. They bathed in the same muddy stream, played football on the same dusty pitch, and shared the same plates of rice and beans during break time at community secondary school. Their mothers had delivered them in the same month at the same village maternity, and their fathers had both worked at the same coal factory before it shut down. To everyone, they were more than friends. They were brothers by fate. Life after secondary school wasn't kind to many boys from Umechukwu. Some joined Agboros at the motor parks. Others turned to street gambling or illegal mining. But Chijioke and Obinna were different. Determined to rise above their background, they stayed in Enugu, hustling day and night. Chijioke sold secondhand electronics at Ogbeat Market, while Obinna ran errands for a local businessman. They pooled their little earnings, rented a room in Abakpa, and ate Gary together like kings. Their luck changed the year they both got recruited into Harmony Resources, a new logistics and oil servicing company expanding into the southeast. With only OND qualifications and raw determination, they started from the bottom, pushing files, scheduling deliveries, and working night shifts without complaint. They were the perfect team. Obinna was the sharp-tongued one, always charming the clients, while Chijioke was the calm planner, solving problems with a quiet mind. Within 2 years, they rose through the ranks. Then, everything changed. One Monday morning, the managing director walked into the office and announced that one of them had been promoted to regional supervisor, a position that came with a car, housing allowance, and direct access to the company's top brass. It was Chijioke. The room clapped. Obinna clapped too, at first. But something shifted in his eyes that day. Something dark and silent. He forced a smile, but his heart boiled like Audrey on hot firewood. "I've been doing the same work," he muttered to himself later that night as they shared suya in their small flat. "I even talk more to the clients." Why Chijioke? But Chijioke didn't notice the change. He remained the same, generous and loyal. He insisted they both continue living together despite his new status. When his new car arrived, he let Obinna drive it around the compound. He even tried to push for Obinna's promotion, often speaking highly of him in meetings. Obinna smiled outwardly, but bitterness was slowly poisoning his soul. Night after night, he stared at Chijioke while he slept and asked the wind, "Why not me?" Then came the plan. He began to watch Chijioke closely at work. He took note of the projects he handled, the documents he approved, and the passwords he used. And when he had gathered enough, he struck, carefully and wickedly. It started with a missing consignment. Then came forged approvals. Before long, a full-blown fraud case erupted in the office. Documents bearing Chijioke's signature authorizing the illegal diversion of hundreds of millions in materials. When the internal auditors investigated, the trail pointed only to one person, Chijioke Naji. On a hot Tuesday afternoon, the FCC operatives stormed Harmony Resources. Chijioke was dragged out in handcuffs, confused and broken. His voice trembled as he pleaded, "I didn't do anything. Obinna, help me." Obinna stood in a corner, shaking his head slowly, pretending to be shocked. Nobody listened. The company disowned Chijioke. His family couldn't afford a proper lawyer. Within 6 months, he was convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison for embezzlement and financial crimes. 10 years for a crime he did not commit. And as Chijioke's name was erased from Harmony Resources, Obinna was rewarded. He was promoted to fill Chijioke's former position. He moved into Chijioke's official house. He started driving the same car that once bore Chijioke's name on the papers. And worst of all, he never visited the prison. Not once. He acted like Chijioke never existed. 10 years later, the prison gates opened slowly one Harmattan morning. A tall, lean man with sunken eyes and a scar across his chin stepped into the cold air, clutching a small bag. His heart pounded. The world had changed. Enugu had changed. But he had changed even more. It was Chijioke. And freedom didn't feel like freedom. It felt like fear. But standing at the gate, waiting with open arms, was Ikena, a young man Chijioke had mentored inside the prison. A fellow inmate, quiet and respectful. Chijioke had taught him how to read, how to write proposals, how to find peace despite the walls. "I told my parents about you," Ikena said. "They're waiting for us. I want you to come home with me." Home. Chijioke's eyes filled with tears. He hadn't heard that word in years. What he didn't know was that Ikena's father was Chief Emezi, a business mogul with oil blocks and shipping contracts, one of the wealthiest men in the southeast. And from that day, Chijioke's new life began, one built not on revenge, but rebirth. He had been buried alive, but now he was about to rise again. The drive to Aka from Enugu was long and quiet. The roads were smoother now than 10 years ago, but to Chijioke, every tree, every billboard, every buzzing kiki sounded like a whisper from the past. He stared out the tinted windows of Chief Emezi's SUV, his thoughts tangled like the weeds that once crept through the walls of his prison cell. Ikena sat beside him, bright-eyed, smiling as if he had just returned from a holiday camp, not prison. The young man had hope tattooed into his bones, a luxury Chijioke no longer recognized. "Relax, brother," Ikena said, clapping his shoulder. "My parents are very kind. I've told them everything. You're not a stranger in our home." Chijioke nodded, still silent. Home. He hadn't known what a true home felt like since he walked out of his late father's compound in Omachukwu 10 years ago, the village watching him like a leper after the scandal broke. His mother died of heartache 6 months into his sentence. His father followed 1 year later, a broken man who couldn't look their neighbors in the eye again. His younger sister Neka, once so vibrant, had stopped writing after her wedding. The shame was too heavy for anyone to carry. He had become the son of no one. But now, somehow, fate was giving him a second script. The SUV turned into a sprawling compound guarded by 2 security men in black suits. At the gate, a golden lion head stood welded into the iron gate, the emblem of the Emezi family. The mansion was majestic, the kind only seen in Nollywood movies. A row of exotic flowers greeted them at the entrance, while a large fountain spat streams of water into a marble bowl carved in the shape of Nigeria. As they stepped out of the vehicle, a tall woman in a wrapper and gold head tie hurried forward, her arms open wide. "You must be Chijioke," she exclaimed. "My son talks about you like your blood." Before he could reply, she embraced him tightly, as if she were hugging a long-lost child. That was the first time, in a decade, that anyone had touched him with love. "I'm Lolo Grace Emezi," she said warmly, guiding him inside. "Come in. You're home now." The house was filled with laughter, food, and a kind of warmth Chijioke had only dreamed of. Chief Emezi was seated in the parlor, wearing a white senator with red coral beads around his neck, reading The Guardian. When he saw Chijioke, he stood up and extended a firm handshake. "Ikena told me everything," he said. "I don't believe in coincidences. I believe God plants people where he wants them to bloom." Chijioke bowed slightly, his heart overwhelmed. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Say nothing. Eat. Rest. Then we plan your comeback." The following months were unlike anything Chijioke had experienced. He was given his own guest house in the compound, complete with a furnished room, a private kitchen, and a small library. Ikena enrolled him in business classes, virtual ones, to sharpen his skills again. His prison scars faded slowly, replaced by self-confidence, self-worth, and something deeper, vision. Chief Emezi was not just a fatherly host, he was a mentor. He began taking Chijioke to business meetings in Aka, Onitsha, and sometimes Abuja. He introduced him to senators, oil executives, tech investors, and Igbo billionaires. No one asked about his past. The chief had already cleared the way. "You've paid the price for another man's crime," the chief told him once, handing him a contract to manage one of his new supply chains. "Now, it's time to start collecting your reward." By the end of that year, Chijioke had saved enough to buy himself a car. A black Lexus RX 350. The same model his former best friend once flaunted in front of him. 2 years later, they traveled abroad, to the UK for a logistics and trade conference. It was Ikena's dream, and Chijioke followed like a shadow. While there, Chijioke studied international supply chain systems, built contacts, and even began his own company under Emezi's mentorship, Digbo Global Freight Ltd. And when they returned to Nigeria after 2 years, Chijioke no longer wore prison sandals or threadbare shirts. He returned in a dark blue agbada, wristwatch gleaming, walking with confidence through Enugu International Airport. The boy they once handcuffed was now a man of influence. But he had one unfinished business. Obinna. The name still stung. Ikenna had never asked about it, but he could feel Chijioke's silence whenever the past came up. And one night, as they sat on the balcony of their new duplex in Independence layout, Enugu, sipping palm wine, Ikenna finally said what Chijioke hadn't dared to. You ready to face him? Chijioke nodded, slow but certain. Not for revenge, he said, but for the truth. I want my name back. The next day, Chijioke walked into Harmony Resources headquarters like a breeze through an old shrine. The receptionist froze. The HR lady nearly dropped her tablet. People stood as he passed, some in fear, others in awe, unsure if they were seeing a ghost or a ghost-turned billionaire. He walked to the front desk and said with calm authority, "Call the MD. Tell him Chijioke Naji is back." The building trembled with whispers. Upstairs, in a polished glass office filled with awards and fake humility, Obinna was drinking cappuccino. He heard the name, dropped his cup, and ran to the window. And there, standing in a dark suit, was the boy he buried alive. Alive. And rich. The corridors of Harmony Resources buzzed like a disturbed beehive. It had been over 10 years since the name Chijioke Naji echoed within those walls. Yet here he was, dressed like royalty, smelling of imported oud, and walking like a man who knew he had nothing to prove, but everything to reclaim. He had not come with police. He had not come with press. He came with presence, and that, in itself, was enough to shake the entire company. Obinna watched from the glass of his office window, frozen. The room spun. His fingers trembled as he adjusted his tie, the same one he had bought from Dubai with stolen money. The cappuccino stain on his shirt now looked like blood. He had spent the last 10 years building a throne made of deception, framing, lying, stealing. He had grown into a feared and respected regional director, taking bribes, manipulating figures, and silencing auditors. He had even won the company's Man of the Year award thrice. And yet, just the sight of Chijioke shattered everything he had built. He had imagined this day once, but only in nightmares. "Sir," his secretary's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Chijioke is in the boardroom. He said you know why he's here." Obinna cleared his throat, rose from his leather chair, and stared at his reflection in the glass. His eyes looked tired, older, and for the first time in 10 years, afraid. He walked slowly down the hallway. Every step echoed louder than the last. Staff peeked from behind cubicles. Some whispered. Some avoided eye contact. All knew the story. All remembered the scandal. And many, silently, had always suspected the truth. The boardroom was cold, filled with the sterile scent of air conditioning and betrayal. Chijioke sat at the far end, back straight, fingers interlocked on the glossy mahogany table. His eyes were calm, too calm, like water that looked peaceful until you touched it and felt its hidden depth. "Obinna," he said, not smiling. Obinna stood at the doorway for a few seconds, then slowly walked in and shut the door behind him. Chijioke, he said with a nervous smile. "You're back." "Yes," Chijioke said. "I am. Alive." Silence. Obinna looked around the empty room, then chuckled dryly and tried to sit across from him. "You didn't call. Didn't send a message. You just walked in. After all these years. You didn't send a message either. Not even to prison." Obinna's throat tightened. "Look, Chijioke. I know you've been through a lot. Stop." Chijioke's voice was like thunder behind clouds, quiet, but dangerous. "I didn't come here for apologies. I came here to watch you sweat. And then, I'll take back everything." Obinna rose in anger, slamming the table. "You think you can come back after 10 years and talk to me like that? Do you know who I am in this company now? Do you know how far I've come?" "Yes, on my blood," Chijioke said coldly. "But it's okay. You can sit down now. I'm not alone." The door opened. 2 men in black suits walked in, private investigators hired by Chief Emizi's legal team. They dropped a thick brown envelope on the table. "Evidence," one of them said. "Internal embezzlement. Signature forgeries. Bribery. Even links to a contractor's murder last year in Port Harcourt. All roads lead to one man, Obinna Ease." Obinna froze. "What is this? What rubbish is this? You think you can set me up the way you set me up?" Chijioke cut in. "Don't worry. We're not here to shout. We have all the time. Another knock. The door opened again. This time, it was the company's chairman, an elderly man, Chief Madrobuchi, who had trusted Obina for years. Behind him were two board members and a female journalist from the Sun. They had been waiting. Chijioke stood up. Sir, I believe this is the right place to finally reveal what your golden boy has done. For the next 45 minutes, Chijioke and the investigators laid everything bare. The emails, the diverted funds, the account numbers, the overseas properties Obina had bought under fake names, and even recordings from a former accomplice who had confessed in exchange for immunity. The boardroom was no longer cold. It was boiling with shock and shame. By the time they finished, Obina's shirt was soaked in sweat. His legs trembled. Call the police, Chief Madrobuchi said quietly. This betrayal, this evil, we must clean our house. Obina fell to his knees. Please, I was just angry. I was jealous. I didn't mean to destroy him. I didn't mean to go this far. He wept like a child. But it was too late. The arrest happened that same evening. The FCC operatives arrived, just like they had come for Chijioke 10 years ago. But this time, they came for the right man. As Obina was let out in handcuffs, he turned to Chijioke, crying. I was your brother. And you murdered that brother. Chijioke replied, his voice filled with grief more than anger. You buried me alive. The press was there. The staff cheered silently. And the city of Enugu whispered that night. Karma is still alive. A month later, Obina was sentenced to 50 years in prison for multiple crimes: financial fraud, obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and being indirectly responsible for a contractor's death through hired thugs. He sat in the same cell block that once held Chijioke. Only now, he had no friend in prison. Meanwhile, Chijioke was offered a seat on the board of Harmony Resources. He politely declined. I'm building something bigger, he told the chairman. Something that won't need lies to stand. He expanded Ndigbo Global Freight Limited, built warehouses in Nui and Port Harcourt, and partnered with international brands. People respected him not because of money, but because he came back from fire without smelling of smoke. One day, during a business summit in Lagos, a young reporter asked him, what would you say to someone who has been betrayed by a friend? Chijioke smiled faintly. Don't die in the fire, he said. Let the fire purify you. Then rise. And that, truly, was the final word. Omichukwu village had not changed much in 10 years, not in the way the cities had. The dusty roads were still there, winding past old mango trees and mud houses patched with fresh clay. Children still bathed in the river, and women still tied wrappers as they pounded fufu in the open. But the people had changed. And when Chijioke Naji returned home after more than a decade, the village square stopped. Old men paused their game of drafts under the Udala tree. Women returning from the stream dropped their basins. Children stared, whispering, Isn't that the man they said went to prison? He didn't come in a convoy. He came in one black Lexus, quietly, without fanfare. But even silence cannot hide a presence that has survived fire. He stopped first at the village cemetery. There, under the shade of a stubborn Irako tree, lay his parents, Matsi and Lolo Naji, buried in shame. They never lived to see his innocence proven, never tasted the fruit of the boy they raised with sweat and integrity. Chijioke knelt by their grave, tears falling like rain in dry season. I'm back, Papa. Mama. I didn't die there. I didn't become bitter. I didn't become like him. His voice trembled. I built something good. I met people who gave me hope. I kept your teachings. And now I'm home. From the cemetery, he walked to the compound he once called home. It stood abandoned, overrun with weeds. The zinc roof was rusted, and termites had chewed through the wood. I'll rebuild it, he whispered. Not for me, but for my children, so they'll know where their story started. Word spread quickly. The next day, the town's Agui sent for him. A special sitting was called in the Obi Palace. Elders, youth leaders, church pastors, and even political figures gathered, not out of pity, but out of honor. There, in front of the same community that once judged and rejected him, Chijioke was welcomed back with traditional kalanut, palm wine, and ndumiri, the cleansing ritual of return. Agui, one of the oldest elders, began. When he left, we thought shame had swallowed him. But see what fire made of him. A man who was buried alive, and yet grew roots. The Agui stood up, dressed in full regalia, red cap balanced firmly on his head. Chijioke Naji, he said, We wronged you. We believed lies. But today, we do not come to wash the past. We come to celebrate your strength. A masquerade danced in his honor that evening, and children sang songs about a man who turned his pain into power. And when he rose to speak, Chijioke's words were simple. Sometimes, God allows you to be thrown into the pit so that when you rise, nobody will doubt it was him. Back in Enugu, life took on a peaceful rhythm. Ikena, his prison friend and now business partner, got married to his university sweetheart. Chijioke stood as his best man, wearing a sky blue senator and smiling without pain in his eyes. Later that year, Chijioke opened a scholarship foundation in memory of his parents, focused on children of ex-convicts, poor widows, and abandoned youths. It was called Naji Light Foundation, and every student wore a badge that read, "My scars are not shame, they are stories." The same year, he met Nina, a social worker who ran a prison outreach program in Succa. She was graceful, bold, and full of questions. At first, he was guarded, but her warmth disarmed him, and soon, her laughter became his healing. 2 years later, they were married in a quiet traditional ceremony in Aka. And when they danced under the stars that night, surrounded by friends and family, someone whispered, "This man's story must be written in a book." One final moment came 5 years later. A request from the Enugu state government arrived at his office. A new rehabilitation center was to be built for wrongly accused prisoners. The governor wanted it named after Chijioke Naji. He declined. "Name it after the silent ones," he said. "The ones who never came back." Instead, he donated the full cost of the center's construction and requested it be named Udo Center, Peace Center. Because after everything, peace was what he had finally found. Not revenge, not applause, just peace. And as he sat on his balcony one evening, watching the sun go down over the hills of Enugu with Nina by his side and his first son sleeping on his lap, Chijioke smiled quietly to himself. The boy who was once buried in shame had now been resurrected in legacy. 5 years had passed. 5 whole years since Chijioke Naji stepped out of Enugu prison with a torn shirt, hollow eyes, and a heart stitched together by nothing but stubborn faith. Now he stood at the gates of the Enugu Correctional Facility, no longer as a number, but as a sponsor. A black Prado SUV idled behind him, carrying files, refreshments, and medical supplies. Around him stood members of the Naji Light Foundation, volunteers, youth mentors, counselors, and lawyers. They had come to launch the Udo Reintegration Project, a new initiative aimed at helping ex-convicts restart life after prison. The gates creaked open. The officers saluted him. He stepped in. The air smelled familiar, thick, cold, metallic. It was the scent of hopelessness, something you never forget no matter how long you've been free. He walked past the walls where he once scratched prayers with his fingernails, past the yard where he had taught Ikena how to read, past the very cell where he had wept alone the night his mother died. But now he carried no shame. He was a light in a place once filled with his darkness. The program began in the prison chapel, where dozens of inmates sat, dressed in orange and blue uniforms, eyes wide, ears ready. Some remembered him. Some had only heard his story. "Now that man be dad?" one inmate whispered. "Yes, Chijioke. The one way that him friend set up. The one way make him for outside." As he stood before them, he looked like royalty in simple clothing. Calm, composed, speaking not with arrogance, but with understanding. "I know this place," he began. "I know what it feels like to be forgotten, to count the days by the sounds of the gates, to dream of freedom like it's a lie." The chapel went silent. "But I'm standing here to tell you something different. That freedom is not just the gate opening. Freedom is when you refuse to let bitterness become your master. Freedom is choosing peace when revenge is within your reach." There was thunderous applause, not out of formality, but from hearts that had tasted pain. After the speech, he moved around the compound, shaking hands with inmates, encouraging them, listening. And then, unexpectedly, an officer approached him. "Sir, someone here requested to see you. Personally." "Who?" The officer hesitated. Your old friend, Obina Ease." Chijioke froze. The name still rang like an old bell inside his soul. He nodded. "I'll see him." Cell block C hadn't changed much. Obina sat on the bare mattress, hunched like an old man, eyes hollow. He looked nothing like the Obina of the past, not the flashy one, not the confident schemer, not the man who once ruled Harmony Resources like a kingdom. He looked like time had stripped him bare and left only the bones of guilt. When Chijioke entered, Obina didn't raise his head at first. He kept staring at the ground until he whispered, "You came." Chijioke said nothing. He stood still, watching the man who had once been his brother and then his executioner. Obina slowly stood to his feet. "I don't deserve to ask for forgiveness," he said. "I think of it every day what I did. How I let jealousy destroy everything good in me. I've died here 1,000 times." He looked at Chijioke now, trembling. "I see you on TV. In newspapers. You built something beautiful. You became what I always wanted to be. But you did it without destroying anyone. Me? I became a shadow." Chijioke sighed deeply. "You were never supposed to be a shadow, Obina. We could have built it together." A pause. "But the truth is, I forgave you a long time ago." Obina broke down. He dropped to his knees and wept like a child. Thank you, thank you." Chijioke didn't move closer. He let the silence wrap around them, not as a wall, but as a witness. Then he said, "I can't change your sentence, but I pray that you find peace while serving it. That's the only justice left." And with that, he turned and walked away, not as a victim, but as a liberated man. That night, back at his Enugu home, Chijioke sat under the stars with his wife, Nina. The air was cool, the trees swayed gently, and the cries of crickets sang in harmony with the peace in his heart. Nina rested her head on his shoulder. "How was it?" "Hard," he said, "but necessary." They sat in silence. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "Not just for surviving, but for choosing the high road." He smiled faintly. "Sometimes, choosing the high road means walking alone. But I'm no longer afraid of that road." Inside the house, their little son, named Nkemdalam, what is mine remains with me, slept peacefully, unaware of the history that had shaped his name. His father had once lost everything, freedom, family, identity, yet had clawed his way back with honor. A year later, Chijioke published a memoir titled Buried, but Not Broken. It became a national bestseller. The book was read in schools, prisons, and youth centers across Nigeria. It told the story not just of one man's fall and rise, but of a generation that needed healing, truth, and justice. And at the back of the book, on the final page, Chijioke wrote, "I was thrown into darkness by someone I loved. But light found me again, not to blind, but to guide." To anyone who has ever been buried in pain, shame, or betrayal, you are not dead. You are seed. Grow.